All right, guys. I do apologize about being a little bit late. It was my fault. It's been a rough day with the kids. A little bit ornery, a little bit sick, and you lose track of time. And well, we're here now, and I'm so excited, man. I've got some really fun things I want to talk about with you. How are you today, Justin Doyle?
Yeah, I'm doing okay. So you'll have to excuse my voice, sniffles. Hopefully, I'll stay away from the coughing and sneezing. I'm just getting over COVID. It wasn't too bad. It's my second time having it, so just getting over it. But yeah, that's why the voice is a little stuffy and might have some extra noise on the cast.
Yes. Give me 1 second, guys. All right. Sorry about that.
No, don't worry about it. I've
So
got two young kids too, so fortunately they're both in bed, so it's just I'm good
it's
now.
usually
But
how it goes. And then they go through like these little weird spurts where they're just like, you know what, Dad, I think I'm gonna push that extra couple yards today.
yeah, yeah,
But no, I think I used to be super nervous to do these lives or whatever, and like hear something or you guys hear something, just a part of it. So I appreciate you guys being patient and sticking around until we got on here. But yeah, dude, I've heard a lot of people, like my relatives and some friends that's dealt with the COVID thing. I don't think I've had it, but it just doesn't sound fun.
like I said, it hadn't been too bad. A little bit of fever, like for just a day, and it broke that night, and it's just feels like cold. You know what I mean?
Sure. Yeah, and that at least that part of it's good, right? They say if it doesn't like seriously affect you, it doesn't feel too much more than what you just explained. So that's good, man. I'm glad you're here. I'm glad you're feeling better.
Yep, appreciate
Um,
it.
of course, man. It's been a long time coming. We've had to reschedule a couple times. Of
Yep.
course, that's kind of how it is, man. Just like life comes up, but I'm so glad to have you here. What is so? We'll start here. Collecting my thoughts. We'll get in my zone real quick. All
Yeah,
right,
yeah,
I'm there.
yeah. Shift modes, right? Kids to
Yeah,
all right. Now I'm into this.
yeah. Like half of my brain's still over there. Um, Tell us about the work that you've published thus far. Um, yeah, kind of just the overview.
Okay. All right. Well, I've written three novels, all in the Star Mark trilogy. I've got a copy of each of them here. So this is the first one. This is Embargo on Hope. The second one is Assassination of Hope. That way, and then the third one's Betrayal of Hope. Came out. This one came out this summer, and I've also got a short story out in the anthology, which I'll show in a minute. But that's essentially it's a science fantasy type novel. I jump back and forth. The whole series, I jump back and forth over that science fiction to fantasy line. Like to play with that line as much as I can, push the boundaries. So you can think of kind of like a Star Wars type universe, right, where you've got science, technology, spaceships, different planets, all of that. But then you've also got magic. Um,
I I think it was until recently I kind of could pick out a story that was science fiction and fantasy because I think that line's a little bit blurry for a beginner, at least for me. Um, and it makes much more sense now. So, what makes your work both fantasy and science fiction? What are those defining things for your work?
Yes, when you think about science fiction, right, you think about technology. You think about how technology plays a role in the story. When it's fantasy, it's a little more whimsical. You have some sort of magic or some sort of guiding. It's kind of you see a lot of the absence of technology. The only times you really see that crossover is maybe like urban fantasy or gaslight fantasy. Gaslamp fantasy. Sorry, some of those kind of things, right? But
Mhm.
usually you can draw the line there. So a lot of times, just by your setting, you've kind of set which genre you're in. Um, One reason I like to say I jump back and forth is because in Embargo on Hope, especially, the main character he lives in a very advanced world, but he can't access it because he's very poor,
Oh
right? So
wow!
he lives in the slums, and the slums almost seem like they're 100 years or 200 years behind the rest of the country, the rest of the world, because they don't have access to that technology. And then you introduce the magic element. They go on a journey that's through plains and forests because they don't have car. He doesn't have a car and everything like that, so they're on foot pretty much. They go into this kind of old temple. So there's all of those kind of elements which really feel fantasy, but then he's got a laser sword at his hip, right? For it's a plasma edge. I do have a little bit of science behind it, but so he's doing all this, and then it's like, oh yeah, but he's got a pistol with that shoots lasers. He's got a laser sword in his hip, right? And then it all the first one is very grounded on that first planet, and then the second one, third one, they start exploring other planets and how that all ties into this kind of single conspiracy, if you will.
Are you familiar with the Sun Eater series? Have you read that?
I haven't read that one, no.
So it's by Christopher Rocchio, and it's going to be a very sprawling, vast. It's brought my mind and imagination farther than I ever thought possible for me. Would you compare what you're doing to the vastness that I'm speaking of?
I think mine's a little more contained right now. So as far as this trilogy goes, it only spans 3 planets, right? There's other planets. So the reason it's called Embargo on Hope is because there's an embargo around the planet. So if you think about like the beginning of Star Wars Episode 1, right? The Trade Federation has this embargo around Naboo. That same kind of concept, right? This embargo is being set by 30 other planets, which are spread across the galaxy. So there is that kind of bigger component, but really these 3 books only focus on these 3 planets, which are neighboring. If you have the equivalent of Venus, Earth, and Mars, right? So it's a lot smaller when you look at it that way, even though there's a lot more a lot more universe out there.
I would still say that, at least for me until recently, that's pretty vast. I wouldn't say that, like, I've only read 1 book in the Sun Eater, which is Empire of Silence, and I would say that that's what you explore is maybe 3. Probably wrong, but I think it's the background noise. Speaking of background noise, but it's the background noise and the things going on as far as like relationships, the complexity of those relationships that kind of drew me in.
Yeah.
Do you like those aspects as far as would you say you are a character, a plot guy, world building?
So I would say this one started off plot, right? Like that was the piece, was that embargo. So for a historical touch point, I was fascinated by the idea of South Africa, the embargo around South Africa that was to essentially ended apartheid, right? That concept fascinated me because one, it's one thing most of the world agreed on, which seems impossible in this day and age, right? And it's a social aspect within that country, right? And it worked, right? It actually made the change. Now I'm a little less naive now. I know there were other factors at play on why that happened and everything, but naive self who started the book, 20 years ago, loved that idea. And when that kind of grew from there, it was okay. If you have an embargo, then you need a social system. How's that social system wrong, right? And why do others perceive that it's wrong? And how could someone who's living in it not perceive it to be wrong? So that all kind of grew from there. And then I started building in the character stories and those kind of things. So I think generally I like to say I don't like to start writing until I have a conflict. Now this one, the conflict was one thing and ended up being something very different. I'm that kind of guy where I start writing and then I get 2/3 of the way through because I'm not a plotter, right? So I don't like to write outlines. I don't like to do that. Okay. I got about 2/3 of the way through the book. And if you've read the book, you'll know where I'm talking about. You get to a certain point and you're like, oh, that's what the book's about. And then I got to go back and do a bunch of revision because then I realize that's what everything's to be driving towards, right? And so that's just the way that I write things.
I like that. That's one of my favorite things I've learned. It wasn't always my favorite. It wasn't always that I knew I was after that bit until I tried to write myself, which is something I very much want to do. Have a novel out one day. And right. I was talking to, he's in the chat over here, Christopher D. Brand. He was on last night. And we went in to really kind of a deep discussion about that personal aspect is very important. Your process is not going to be the same as the next guy. Not even, there's generalities that you can make that maybe you can take things from and kind of pick and choose with. But I think one of the points that I'm trying to make is, I forget how he said it, but it's like these defining rules, like never do this or always do this. I just think it's all so subjective that you can't really say that. It's all different for everybody. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. So, some people, Brandon Sanderson, obviously he puts out a book a quarter, right? He's a very strict outliner, right? That's just his process, right? And, so you either have to do it in the front end or the back end, right? Like what you end up when you're writing a novel, you either do that planning up front or you end up, and so you don't have to rewrite as much, or you do on the back end, you have to do a lot of rewrite, right? And but I would prefer to let the story see where it goes, let the characters show me who they want to be, which I know, which always sounds great. All writers say that kind of thing, right? The characters are talking to me, or characters, but that's really what it is. The characters tell me who they want to be. They're like, okay, now I'm going to make sure that's who they are, right? And they're consistently who they are. Even though I was writing, I just submitted a short story for a contest, flash fiction, 1,000 words, right? Even that, it was the last word that I typed on the page when I got to my, limit, around the limit. It's like, oh, that's what the story's about. Literally the last word. And so
that is incredible to hear.
So yeah, so that's just, I think, the way it works. And you realize, I think some people do go into it saying, I want to write a story about this, but I think a lot of times you just realize that you end up going a different direction, and that's perfectly okay. You can't let that bother you. Sometimes you got to go back and rewrite. Maybe you have to do extensive rewrites, but something in your heart or your brain or your fingers leads you there, and you realize, okay, that's it.
Christopher's he's picking up on your vibe, man. He's really digging it. I am too, by the way. I think you said something really profound there, and it's kind of, there's not many things I know for sure about my process yet. One of the only things I know is I have to have that creative freedom between plot points for me to be able to naturally write those characters and allow them to be who they're going to be. If I constrict myself with boxes, and what I mean by that is I don't think I'm going to be an extreme outliner, but it will be part. I do apologize, guys, but yes, I will be somewhat of an outliner, and I don't think that, because I've tried pantsing, and absolutely not for this guy. I lose track of everything. It's like I come back the next day, and like I don't even know where I'm at.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because for this last novel this novel I'm working on now, and I've taken a long break from it, but I started writing it, I started pantsing it, and realized it was going to get me in trouble because part of what worked for these books is it's only one point of view, and so when you're one point of view, you can keep consistent voice, and you can kind of keep your timeline consistent, right? It's as it goes, right? But this other book I was writing was 3 points of view, and the time and distance between them, because it's space opera again. These planets are 20 days apart from each other, but it's supposed to tell one cohesive story. And what I realized is that I was struggling with, okay, this has to, there's like a order this has to happen in, and it has to be 20 days of occurrences between that. And I was trying to keep it to where it was, character 1, character 2, character 3, character 1, character 2, character 3. And so because I'm an engineer, I ended up writing out a spreadsheet, and it was just character 1, character 2, character 3, chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3, and just what day that was happening. And I had to do that, and I hated myself for it. I can't. I see pantsers rising up, right? Like, I'm with you. I hated myself. It killed me somewhere in here to do it, but I was like, I'm getting too confused. I can't keep it straight. I went and built an Excel sheet, and that helped me at least keep it straight. Now I don't really know the plot points too much. I just have like one line, literally one line in each tab or each cell that just says this, right?
And that keeps you pointing in that direction.
Yes.
I love that, dude. So what I'm taking from that personally is you may not have to absolutely outline every single detail, just as long as you've got enough for you to keep yourself on track.
Yeah. I mean, really,
totally get it.
What's the salient point of that chapter, or the salient plot thing, or something like that? What is that?
Absolutely. That makes a lot of sense. I like that. And I think a lot of people are like, I'm going to try this writing thing, and I'm only going to take myself seriously if I can do it this way, like this guy, or do it this way, like that guy. And I found myself, I've heard Stephen King, of course, he's a pantser. It's like, I've heard him talk about his process. It's like, oh my gosh, like I could never do what he does.
And well, I do want to say about Stephen King, I think he creeps me out a little bit, because not only is he a pantser, but he comes up with all these horrible things, and they're just there. You know what I mean? Like, it doesn't take him any time to think about them. It's just like, because he puts out 3 or 4 books a year, right? And they're just there, right? So honestly, he terrifies me a little bit.
Yeah, it's like he used that gift, I guess, if you want to call it that, for the most constructive purpose he could, right? He could have been something completely
Yes.
along the same vein, but maybe a little bit worse, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh,
Absolutely.
yeah, so I'm a huge fan. I think that was the first author. I mean, I feel like a lot of people are that way. I feel kind of like I'm a cliche by doing that, but that's just true. The first, well, it's probably the second fantasy novel I picked up was Fairy Tale from Stephen King, which I loved, by the way. And of course, I've read a lot of his other stuff, and very different from his other stuff.
Yeah.
But
I've only
one,
read Dark Tower stuff by him because I was staying very grounded in science fiction.
I tried it out, and I got through the first book, and then
It just
um,
gets weirder and weirder.
I'm reading about this sand, and there's crabs, and it's like cutting his hand off or something along those lines. And I just couldn't get. It's too far out there for me.
It gets
Um,
really far out there. Just
I
wait till you
hear
get
that.
to talking steam engines, and then.
That's hilarious. But I love somebody that can do that with their imagination.
Oh yeah.
It I talk about this a lot, so you guys have probably heard me say it. I didn't start reading when I was younger. I wish I would have. I didn't find it until I was 29. I'm 33. So I'm currently working on all of that, and I'm glad to be here now. But it's at the same time, I feel like what I want to give my kids is that opportunity to start young and really grow that imagination, because I think it's important to have as an adult.
Yeah, absolutely. So what I found is interesting. So I read a lot when I was a kid, right? Whole bunch. Then you get into middle school and high school, and all the reading's an assignment, right? And then it's not as fun anymore. And so, I was doing the reading, but I didn't really start reading again until I was in my graduate classes, because graduate school was easy enough for me. I know it was a lot easier than undergrad. So graduate school was easy enough. I was like, wait a minute, I'm in Texas A&M. We have a huge library. I need to start reading again before I'm out of here in 2 years. And I
It's a
did, and
great
that's what really
college.
got me back into reading again. I don't know, 15 years ago, whenever that was.
So what's their degree in?
My undergrad is in aerospace engineering, which was very difficult.
I'll
My
bet.
graduate is in system engineering, which was far easier.
Man, that we'll touch on that here soon, man. It's going to be so fun. I've been ever since I think the first message you sent me. Hey, this is my background. I'm like, this is going to be a fun interview. So we will get to that. I can't wait. Um, a little bit about the writing of the work you've published so far. What are some themes that you explore?
So what's funny? I was telling you I didn't know what the book was about until I got two-thirds of the way through it. I accidentally really got into discussions of faith, and it wasn't. And it was about kind of just a full disclosure. I am a Christian, and so, but I believe in questioning it, and if it holds up, then it's good, right? So a lot of the book and a lot of the trilogy is about questioning it and seeing where your religion doesn't hold up, right?
I love that you said that, by the way.
Yeah, so
I think a lot of people are.
I'm not going to get here and preach, but I believe my religion holds up, even as a scientific person, and I
Love
think
it.
that gives me a little bit different perspective than maybe other people, because I do look at it scientifically. My brother, a lot of times I'll discuss my brother. He's like, "How can you be like that, considering you're an engineer and scientific method and all that?" And I'm like, "Well,
Yeah.
a lot of times you ask the questions and there aren't good scientific answers maybe yet, or they don't disprove anything, or so a lot of it is just about what does it mean to have faith,
Mm-hmm.
right? And faith is filling the gaps, right? It's believing that we're never going to have all the answers, and the rest of the answers come from there, right? And you can't scientifically prove it, right? Because you never have the answers. So the book goes a lot of exploring and playing with that. The whole trilogy is really about that, and what happens and how do you deal with it and all of that.
So, first of all, I find that theme very, very cool. Yeah, I find that very fascinating, because we think a lot alike in that area. And I think that whether you talk about your faith in this or that as part of your experience, and nobody has to agree, it's your personal thing. And when you share that, I think it just opens up that window into what you're doing and what your passions are and what your inspirations are, to get that better experience or get to know you through your book and what drove you to write it. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
absolutely. And again, that was not my intent going into this thing, right? It just somehow that's what got there. So I'll just say that's it's the faith is part of a big driver for the book, but there's a whole lot of other things going on. There's politics, and there's war and there's assassinations and there's laser sword fights and zombies and vampires. And so, it's like I say, if you
That's
want to look at
awesome.
that one theme that drives all the way through, that's it. But there's a lot of other stuff going on.
I've learned to kind of love that. At first, I was intimidated by those type of, I guess, a lot of background noise. Not maybe that sounds bad saying it that way, but it's a good thing. Like, you've got this relationship, but then you've got these two people fighting, these two races fighting, and then you've got this king over here. It's like I feel if an author can capture me that much to care about the subplots and those characters that aren't main characters, but still play a wonderful part in the literature, it's really fun. So I'm
And it's our
very
job to tie
pumped.
it together, right? Like, it's sometimes it's so, especially if you only read part of a series and you're like, why is this happening? Like, how does this tie in? And then eventually it's like, oh, because now the character is somehow in that situation. Like somehow that this situation over here that seems unrelated, now it's starting to creep more and more into what the character is trying to achieve, right?
And I think I like it even more knowing it's one POV, you said, right?
Yes, yes.
I like that. I like a multiple POV. I do. I like that more in my epic fantasy though.
Yeah.
When it comes to science fiction, I think I like the one point of view. Now, I don't think I've read a science fiction with multiple points of view, so I can't be certain that I'm saying that as 100% truth. But I
Well,
do enjoy an epic fantasy with lots of points of view.
well, I'll tell you. So, my favorite science fiction book, I'm going to say books, is Hyperion and Fall of Hyperion, Rise of Hyperion. Yeah, Fall of Hyperion
Oh yeah,
by Dan Simmons. That one is multiple point of view. It is vast, it is wide ranging across multiple galaxies, planets, stuff going all over the place. That's my favorite. I would say that was very inspirational for me for the way I write, though I could never write that big. I had to bring it back down. And there's a lot of stuff there that's like he never says magic or anything, but you're like, this is pretty close to, it's so far technologically advanced that it's like this is probably magic somehow, right? So if you want that kind of multiple POV, wide-ranging science fiction, you have to read both of them. There's technically 4 in the series. There's kind of 2 duologies put together, if you will.
it's
But
just
that one is
moved
my
further
favorite
up my
science fiction,
TBR.
and it is multi-POV.
I've heard a lot of people tell me that they love, Hyperion, and it's kind of just been one of those, kind of like Game of Thrones for me.
It's a
I've dipped
commitment.
into it, but I haven't dipped into Hyperion, and I think it just moved up a little bit for me because I
It's
found this unknown love for science fiction lately that
yeah,
I never would have guessed that I would have fell into. So I'm very anxious to explore that.
yeah, yeah.
Um, okay, so I really enjoyed the themes that you talked about, and I liked that you went in a little bit about your process and how you had to find that out, and it's a personal process. It's very helpful to me, especially, and if it's helpful to me, I know there's so many other people listening that are just like, man, that makes sense.
Yeah, I hope
Um,
so.
Now, in your work, do you find yourself on the harder side? I have to give credit to Christopher for this question because he said it last night and I loved it, so I used it. Um, are you more for the harder side of science fiction, being like scientifically accurate, or the softer side of science fiction?
These are clearly on the softer side, right? Like I said, there's magic, but I think where I like to put things is that things that are clearly, like, if you're going to have both, if you're going to have science and magic, be clear about when it's magic and when it's science, right? And make sure the science is possible. So, like, I like to joke that one of my biggest, one thing I really hate about science fiction movies in general is that it's a really dumb thing. Let me tell you, it's so dumb, but is how spaceships will go straight from space to ground, like it's a straight line.
Yeah,
That's not a thing, right?
you
You
got to
have to
orbit.
orbit first. You have to come in at angle, all of that, right? And it happens all the time.
Man,
Happens in
I'm telling
Star Wars,
you,
happens in Star Trek, happens in all of them, right? And it drives me nuts.
we're on that same wavelength. I totally understand that.
It's such a dumb thing, but I'm just like, whenever I see it on screen, I'm just like,
Well, I think it's something that you have to use in your day to day that you learn in school that you've done for a very long time and studied hard for. So it's hard for you not to think that because you know the
yeah.
reality of it.
So that's where I think I like to, So the next book is definitely the next novel I'm working on, completely unrelated. It's definitely hard science fiction, but I don't, I'm not going to dive too much into technologies. There's going to be like there's an upper layer where I'll get into, and then after that, it's hand wavy, right? Um, it's all about just trying to explore what's possible, right?
Sure.
Even if
Uh,
you're using an unobtainium or something like that, or limitless energy source or something like that, I think that's okay. It's just making sure what is supposed to be scientific and what's not.
I thought unobtainium or unobtainium was the best word ever. I mean, it just makes perfect sense when you say like unobtainable. Okay, I get it. That makes
Yeah,
good. That's a good fiction name.
you know.
Uh,
So, but even in these books, I have my laser sword. I do have an underlying physics principle for the laser sword because it's supposed to be technologically based, right?
mm,
You dive in a little too deep and you're like, well, you'd have to have, immense amounts of energy to make that happen in a very compact package, right? I kind of ignore that part. But, I talk a little bit about, I don't remember, when you write so many words, they tell you, you write a 100,000 word novel, then you've cut 200,000 words out, right? So, you know, I'm trying to remember, but, theoretically you can hold plasma in with a magnetic field. And so if you're generating that, then you've got magnetic field and plasma is very strong. So, there you go, a laser sword, but plasma edge, right?
I think, and again, I just heard this recently. I believe last night it was. Don't worry about the realism. Just make sure this is believable. Something along those lines. Like it doesn't have to be exactly scientifically right. But if it's not believable, then your readers are going to kind of stray.
Right. And you got to set your rules, right? So if you set the rules in the world, as long as you're not, jumping out of those, then you're usually okay.
I like that. And it's very helpful because, you know, before you dive in and actually think about, I mean, it's not just sitting down writing words. There's so much more that you discover that's in this process, even from the very beginning before you've actually tried it. You have no clue, right? And all these questions pop up. And I just love that I get to talk to people and just kind of get that information face to face. It's really cool.
But
Um,
it's funny just because, like I said, you cut 200,000 words, so you can fall into a trap of world building very easily, where you're just like you're going next layer, next layer, next layer, and then you realize you got into a layer that is never going to expose itself in any book, right? And
mhm.
so you have to dig yourself out of that trap before you've spent 3 hours world building and 0 hours writing, right?
I definitely get that. And I found myself just thinking like no words getting written down. So that makes a lot of sense. Um, the type of work do you do? We'll kind of dive into that real quick. So what is it that you do?
So I'm wearing a couple different hats these days. So my primary position is as a kind of project program manager-ish. Like I don't manage any people, but just literally the project program of the NASA Gateway space station.
That's
So
incredible, man.
the NASA Gateway space station is going to be the first first space station around the moon. Um, it'll be there for approximately 15 years or so once it launches. Um,
That's
one major difference
huge.
between this space station and the International Space Station is if you follow the news at all, International Space Station, they have crew up there all the time. Every
Mm,
day, all day, they have crew members up there, somewhere between 4 and 9, depending on where they are in their cycle. Um, Gateway Lunar Space Station, once a year, up to 30 days, basically support the moon mission and come back home. So that creates very different challenges, right? Um, if something breaks on ISS, you go call the crew and say, "Hey, can you go look at this?" Something
mm.
breaks on Gateway, there might not be a crew member there. You need a robot. You need to have good data. You need to have good telemetry, something like that. And then, how badly do we need to fix this? Can the crew do it when they get there? Do we need to isolate? So it's a whole different set of challenges. Um,
That is
you go ahead.
outstanding to hear, man. I don't know. I'm just baffled. I'm just kind of speaking out loud. I think that is absolutely one of the coolest things I've ever heard.
Um, and I dropped a link in the chat just to the Gateway homepage.
Oh,
Um,
nice.
So if you scroll down just a little bit, you can see what that space station looks like. It's significantly smaller than the International Space Station. Um, maybe around a quarter, right? Maybe a quarter of the size once it's fully built. Um, but again, we're supporting a smaller crew. We're supporting it for less time, and so you don't need it to be as big. It'll still be doing things when there aren't crew there. It'll be doing a lot of um, observation of the sun, observation of the earth, observation of the moon, those kind of things. Even when there isn't crew there. But then when the crew is there, it's really about, let's get a couple of things finished up here. We're going to send some crew members down. They're going to do the lunar exploration, all that kind of stuff. Come back up, come back home.
So I was just going to go down a road. I'm not going to do it. I'm just going to make a quick joke. It's like, so how many in the chat believe that the world's flat? Because the guy's going to school you right now. I'm just joking. That is so cool, man. So I think every boy and girl at some point in their childhood's like, I'd like to be an astronaut, or I'd like to work on a space station, dude. And the fact that you're using your critical thinking skills, priorities, you've went to school for this, I find that very cool. And bravo, congratulations for that, because that must feel really cool to be involved in such a cool project.
Yeah, so I was really blessed. Like I said, I grew up south of Houston. I've lived here almost my whole life. We went to NASA a lot. When I was in 7th, 6th, 7th, 8th grade, I probably went to Johnson Space Center 8 to 10 times, right?
Yeah.
From there, I was like, all right, I know what I want to do with my life. And so every decision, going to college, degree, all of that kind of stuff was all working towards that goal. And then I made it. So, that's so I count myself very blessed because I knew what I wanted to do. I didn't know exactly what it meant, right? I didn't know what it meant to go work at NASA. I figured that out later, but I knew from a very young age what I wanted to do. I mentioned my brother earlier. He was on the opposite hand. He didn't know what he wanted to do until he went to grad school,
Wow.
So, so but I mean, he's good too. So it just seems like it both ways can work, right? I count myself very blessed because I was given those opportunities and it guided me here, right?
Absolutely. Man, there's so many different parts that that story has in it that we could talk all night about. But I just wanted to overall say that's very, very cool. What is it? So when you're writing, I'll start here. Were you involved in what you're doing now before you started writing, or did you write first?
I was in college at the time, so I have fond memories of sitting on my balcony in college, starting this book. Right, it was the summer between classes. I didn't have a job. I wasn't doing anything. I was being a bum, and I wrote. Like that summer was when the first draft came out. Again, I'm talking about like 2005, right? So if you're doing if you're doing the math here, you can realize it took me a long time from starting this book to actually finishing it.
I feel like you were pretty busy though. Getting school degrees and
it's funny because I don't really consider that I was that busy. It's just I used to get on a roll or get off of a roll, right? So I worked on it for 6 months, not work on it for 6 months, and I did that for years. And then when COVID-19 hit, it was like, okay, I'm stuck at home. It's time. And so that's what really pushed it to the finish line. And I've tried to keep up a rhythm since then, and things have changed. I'm busier now, right? I've got the job. I've got the 2 kids now. I didn't have the kids until, they're young. They're 4 and 2.
That changes your whole world.
Yeah. And so I'm very fortunate to have a supportive wife that I can steal an hour every night to go work on books, right? To go
That's
write,
awesome.
research, do whatever it may be. But that hour I gotta maximize,
Well, the support system, something I speak a lot on as well, and so many other people as well too. It's just so nice to have that, right?
Absolutely.
You've got a loved one that just loves that you have that passion and they want to help that out. So it's very inspiring to hear. Do you find
my wife calls it a safe hobby, right? Like
sure.
I'm not going out. I'm at home. I'm not doing, I'm not putting myself in situations that get myself in trouble. I'm here. Yeah. I'm just, I'm available if something comes up, so even though it's a me time, right? Like I have to do it by myself. I have to be by my, and so there's that. But she's like, well, you know what? You're here. You're not going out doing other things. So
that makes sense. And that's a very realistic point.
Not that she doesn't trust me. I don't want the audience to think she doesn't trust me, but it's just, she's like, if you're going to pick a hobby, well, that's a pretty good one, right?
It's better than people going around and going to bars or like going and shooting pool every night and I get exactly what you're saying. And I feel like reading and writing and anything with literature and trying to just improve yourself, whether it's that or this or this or that, is beneficial to your head, to your brain, to your mind, to your life, your mental state. And I totally agree with her. It's a very safe, and more broad terms safe. It's beneficial. I think I like too.
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
Um,
it's good. It's good for your brain, right?
I think somebody told me Murphy Napier made a video. She's another booktuber of how reading changes your brain. And there's like evidence of like scans that they do. I haven't watched it yet, but I think that'd be really fascinating.
Yeah.
Um, have you found that your schooling and the work that you do benefits your creativity as far as what you're writing?
So, so it's funny because a lot of people think that engineer and writer are like, you get put those two things together, right? And so nothing I did in school directly helped my writing, right? I took tech writing. Tech writing is like a manual on how not to write creatively, right? Like you take that course, and you're like, okay, these are all the things I'm not going to do when I'm writing over here creatively, right? But I
Sure.
had to know it for work, right? So from a pure, creative writing aspect, no, there's no crossover, right? But from a getting the scientific feeling, trying to think, you think a little bit differently when you're an engineer. You think about problem solving. It's you just do. You think a little bit different. Like I said, I have my outline is an Excel spreadsheet. You know what I mean? Like that's just
You're
it's
a
just me.
process
So
guy.
so a lot of times you'll get exposed to technologies or things that you would have never heard of otherwise, right? Or some physics thing or something like that, right? So for example, this contest that I told you that I did the flash fiction for, it's actually for a quantum mechanics magazine of all things, right? Like they
Wow.
want to do a flash fiction, or they do this every year apparently, a flash fiction with stories, and they have to have something to do with quantum mechanics. Doesn't have nothing too explicit, right? But I was like, you know what? I know just enough about quantum mechanics, like which again, like this much, right? Like
That's
literally,
still a lot because quantum mechanics is
right?
incredibly crazy.
And actually, and this much confuses me still. But I, and so I was like, well, so that I could actually just go write that story in a couple of weeks and be comfortable with it, right? And so that's where so I think you get that kind of like knowledge base that I think helps a little bit and lets you dive into some things that maybe you wouldn't have been able to dive in otherwise.
I love that, man. I do. I really dig that. I can just imagine part of this system over here with this project. Maybe you aren't even involved in. Oh, what's that? Oh, it's this new type of technology, and then all of a sudden you've got this idea how that could kind of build off one another. John A. Douglas in the house, man. Hope you had a wonderful time at church. And yes, we're glad you're here, brother. So I like that a lot. You talking about, and for me, I'm just like I'm walking through. My dad's an airplane mechanic, so I'm picturing like a hangar,
Right.
and like you've got this project over here. These people working on this project, and you're kind of just collecting what your mind sees. Or at least I would be, or uh, rhetorically or hypothetically, and picking up on those little nuances that could breed something to life in a book. That sounds very possible.
But you don't have to be in an industry like that to even get it, right? If you just read Popular Mechanics, right, you can get probably 5 ideas out of a singular Popular Mechanics magazine, right? Just like looking, oh, that's interesting. So I'll give you an example. There's a company that now they launch their rockets by spinning them around really fast and letting them go. That's
Wow.
how they launch rockets to space.
Triple to force?
Yeah, that's what it is, and they do it just fast. Obviously, you can't do it with people, right? So they do it with stuff,
Yeah.
but you know, they just spin them around really fast, and that's something like I had a degree in this stuff, and it's something I never considered, right? Like,
It's
and
kind of
but there's a
like
company out there doing it, and so it's like, man, I'd like to think of a way that to incorporate that into a story sometime.
I always think of like these weird scenarios. Okay, imagine somebody who passed 300 or 400 years ago came back to life today. How much of what they would see in technology today as purely magic?
Yeah,
I
it's all
mean,
magic.
they would. I mean, a phone with no wire that you can speak through and see was just a dream that was never going to come true. And
It's funny is the only I think like the only people who could even survive would be like a Da Vinci, right? Because he was
mm,
just creative enough to where I think he could make the leap in his mind, right? But I think like a
crazy
complete
enough.
scientist like Newton would just be lost, right?
Mm,
Like even though he invented calculus, right, and modern physics, or I guess classical physics, right? Like
mm.
I think he'd be lost, but like someone like Da Vinci, because he had that creative sense, right? I think he'd be disoriented, but I think he'd get it.
Yeah, that's so cool to think of, man. Because to me, I feel like if I die 200 or 300 years ago, there was not much going on as far as the technology we see today. So that's always fascinated me too, just kind of thinking of that situation and just how incredible that would be, or maybe scary.
Well, and I've thought about it with our generation. So, we grew up with computers, right? We're really the first generation to kind of have them our whole life. We didn't have smartphones our whole lives, right? We didn't have that kind of stuff, but we're really the first to grow up with computers. And so I always wonder what's going to be that technology when we're 75 that we just don't understand. Like we
Yeah.
just because at least we had computers. Now everything seems computer. Like it's an iteration of the computer, right? You see, it's not
Yes.
as or even if it's a quantum based computer, which will make no sense, right? It's still a computer, right? And so I've always wondered what that technology is going to be when we're on our deathbeds and like, what the hell is this thing?
It's fascinating, isn't it?
How do
And
you
it's
how do you work this?
maybe we'll be teleporting. Like maybe we'll just be like, I want to go to wherever, and you can just, boom, you're there. Who knows?
My hypothesis, it'll be some sort of biological computer technology,
Mm.
something like that. I think that might be the thing, but I
There's
don't know.
already progress in that area as far as like chips and stuff, so you
Yeah.
can put in your brains and stuff. It's craziness. It's there's going to be a boundary where I think that science is going to have to become lawfully held to, because people are going to have some crazy ideas. I can just see it now, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Um, absolutely. So let's see here. I love this conversation. I haven't nerded out about that kind of stuff in a minute. So when did you find maybe we've covered this, maybe we haven't. My brain's been scrambled. My kids were yelling. Deal with me,
I get it.
guys. So when did you find your love for literature? Or maybe a better question, who are some of those foundational authors who may have like their hand in the way that you write?
So, like I said, I started reading when I was young. I started writing when I was young. I think I was published in a first grade for a short story, right, in the paper, the school paper or whatever. So, started reading when I was young. I think when it really got more focused and more serious was, the first fantasy. I mean, I think The Hobbit was really the first fantasy book. I read I think the Dark Rising trilogy or something like that by Susan Cooper is another one. When I was in middle school, I read T.A. Barron. He wrote the Lost Years of Merlin series. That one, and I got to meet Tom Barron. He's a great
Oh,
guy.
wow.
In middle school. So I think that one had a very formative effect early on my reading and writing. So I was very more fantasy earlier, I think, and it's shifted to be it's just 50-50 now. Like whether it's if you can see my bookshelves behind me, there's about 50% fantasy, 50% sci-fi. There's some sports books and stuff on there too, and some space books. But
That's
primarily,
awesome.
it's about 50-50 between the two.
Yeah, I was gonna bring that up. I'm digging the bookshelf. Mine's fake. It's just a green screen. I'll have a nice one of the. Yeah, I just don't have the room. I've got one in front of me, but it just doesn't work for these.
Yeah, no, I'm very for this is my office. I say because especially once you have kids, nothing is yours anymore. But
Yeah.
it's my office. So I was able to build these bookshelves to hold all these books and
Good man builds his own bookshelves. Me too.
yeah.
I love that, and not only that, I like a black bookshelf. I think that there's something classic about it. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't really. It was because my desk was black, which really I don't know. It felt like the contrast and I don't know. I can't really explain it, but it just felt like the right choice.
I agree. Black is it always, like, whether it's a shirt or a bookshelf. I can agree with that. So what are you working on at the moment?
So this trilogy, I published one novel a year last 3 years. Unfortunately, this year I'm not going to make it. I'm not going to have everything ready. I've got a lot of writers tell you they have a lot of irons in the fire. I'm usually pretty good about writing one thing at a time. I know a lot of people kind of might jump from like one whip to another and back and forth. Generally, I can stick with one thing. I'm pretty focused like that. Part of the reason for that is because of voice. I struggle with hopping back and forth between voices, right? And it's like I feel like once you've captured that character's voice, like you gotta keep going. You don't want to lose it. You don't want to drop it. You know how that character talks and thinks, and you want to stick with it.
I think that's a really good point that you're making. I often hear things like that, which I haven't made it that far, and I'm like, I feel like I would have had that question, should I maybe work on this one or this one if that problem, was in front of me. And now I feel like I would relate a lot with that. If I'm having this voice and it's coming well and I'm getting words down and I'm being creative, I don't know if I would necessarily do that if things are kind of rolling away.
Well, yeah, it's funny because so the novel that I'm working on, like I said, it's been on pause for a while, but the novel I'm working on, 3 POVs, and I was doing this character, this character. I was doing it in chronological, right? This character, this character, this character, this character, this character. And then I realized, I think I need to write like all of this character's chapters first because I'm firmly in that character's head. And then I need to come back and do the next characters, or at least do like 3 or 4 at a time.
Wow.
Because I've got that person like rolling,
That makes sense.
Because it felt like I was like stopping myself. I was like, okay, I'm starting to understand this person, and then I would stop it, and I'm on to the next one.
It's like now I got to start that process over when I could just kind of keep flowing with it.
A lot like starting over each time, and I've kind of wondered, and maybe other authors in the chat can chime in. Like I don't just how they do it, right? It was because this is my first multiple POV, and it was, do I write the plot, in order? Do I write the character, their line all the way through? Since I'm gonna have to rewrite anyway, so I'd have to go clean up stuff, no matter what. And I mentioned that outline a little bit earlier, so that also helps me do that because I know like where that next chapter will be.
What advice would you give about getting through that first draft? What's something that you learned to be very helpful as far as getting through that first draft and not like being a perfectionist?
I think, for me, and you'll hear this advice over and over again, just keep putting words on the page. I think I can't remember. So I took math. I had, when I was during COVID-19, I got the master class for a year. I don't know if you don't know what master class is, it's a service that I think it costs $150 for a year, something like that. But basically they get people, to teach you the stuff they know about, right? Like
very much worth it.
So it's stuff like, it's Neil Gaiman and Dan Brown and David Baldacci and, those are the people you're learning writing from, right? They're people, they're all New York Times bestsellers over and over again, right? But they also have people like Steph Curry to teach you how to shoot a basketball. So they get the experts, right? They have Samuel L. Jackson teaches you how to act, right? Like they're the people, right? And so it's pretty cool. Yeah, Tim Wolf, I did the same thing, right? Like it was pretty much okay. I've got 1 year. I'm going to listen to all the authors, and then I might get some other things in too, right? But that is my focus. And so anyway, I can't remember. I think it was Neil Gaiman. It might have been Dan Brown who said that a lot of times when you're struggling, right, it can feel like when you're writing, you're laying a brick wall, right? And you're having to pick out each brick and look at it and examine it and then stick it on there. And then you're picking the next one. Each brick is a word, right? And you're having to go. And then some days it just feels like you're just laying a line. And I think we've all had those days. And I think the profound part of it was that at the end of the day, the reader cannot tell the difference. They don't know which passage took you 3 weeks to write and which passage you wrote in a night. And that there's something really profound about that to me, and it's super obvious, but you don't think about it when you're in it. You're struggling to type and you're trying to find the next key. And,
I think that's a great insight though. It's something that you've taken from your experience that I can bet that I'll deal with, or who anybody else that's writing is probably going to deal with, and for the same reason. So it's very valuable to hear people's experience, because you always hear experience is knowledge, and not it is, and it's hard to speak on something if you haven't done it. And listening to people who have done it, it just I guess I kind of just think that when I hear about an author's book and I get to speak with that person, it's a better experience. But if I get to also talk writing and further my advances and honing that craft, me personally, and anybody in the chat or who watches after it's not live, it's just a replay, I just find that very valuable. And it's cool because I don't know, maybe I'm just kind of a nerd and I like to hear about people writing, but either way, it's super fun.
Yeah. And so there's at least 3 tricks I know of though. Like, so, you have to stop for the night, right? You have to get up in the morning because the kids are going to wake you up at the crack of dawn or whatever, right? Or you only have an hour or whatever. And so there's at
Sure.
least 3 tricks I know. The one that I do is I like to write notes for the next thing, right? So
Ooh.
I'll finish writing what I'm writing for the day, and I'm like, okay, this is what's next. Like 2 or 3 sentences, right? But I've heard of people who say stop in the middle of an action scene,
Mm,
which sounds crazy, but also you'll be able to pick that up a lot quicker, right? Because you'll
yep.
know where you're at, right? Another thing that some people do, I don't think this one's good advice, but it does work for some people, is re-edit like the last, I don't know, page you wrote. Just edit that page and then start diving into writing, because
Hmm.
it just gets you in the mindset. It helps you get where you were going.
So
I think
edit
it's
the
really
last
bad to
page that
edit
you
while you're
wrote.
writing. Personally, I think you'll get caught in a trap. But I think if you're strict about, you're just going to edit the last thing you wrote and then move on, it can help maybe get you in the mindset so that you're not sitting there staring at your flashing cursor for an hour, right?
Yeah. I'm trying to think. So would it just be the same effect if you were just to reread? I mean, the last page that, or is it the editing part that they've kind of honed
I
in
think
on?
the editing engages the whole mind to fingers pathway.
Okay.
That's just the way I'm looking at it. Because I think reading, it's just your eyes, and maybe you're getting your brain going, but you're not getting the whole rest of your body going.
Okay.
So that's just how I'm going to put it. It's kind of like a weird, yeah. It's starting an engine for my brain. Yeah, it's kind of like that, right? It's like you're getting it going, you're getting the whole process. Now you're getting power to the wheels, right? Like you're kind of getting there.
And that it does it makes sense. I think there's those also that there's the advice I anybody hears really, and say I know me and I can kind of pick out what makes more sense for me. And I think the one that you said that makes a lot more sense for me were the first two, especially the action scene. I've heard that a couple times, and man, honestly, the first time I heard it, I was like, "That's brilliant." If I stop in an area where I'm very excited to continue writing, it's
Yeah.
not going to be hard to pick up that next day and just keep flowing with it.
Yeah. I mean, it always make naturally, you're like, oh, it makes sense to end at the end of a scene. But then a lot of times it's hard to get started again, right? Or end of a chapter, whatever you do, it gets a lot. Then you have to, okay, I got to start and set up the next scene. A lot of times that'll flow naturally if you were in the middle of it.
And if you've only got an hour, you're going to spend a lot more time maybe coming up with new ideas or being creative. But I like that piece of advice. I really do. Um, what are some stupid clock plays a noise every hour? Um, what are a couple of your 2024 goals? And that could be about anything.
So when it comes to writing, I'm focusing on short stories for now. Just trying to get a couple of it's a little bit different when you're writing short stories, and that story I did for flash fiction. It was the first time I'd ever written flash fiction. Um, so right now I'm trying to get some short stories done. I've got a middle grade novel that I've been working on. I call it, it's my middle grade sci-fi. It's like Jurassic Park, but for middle graders, right?
All
So,
right.
that book, I'm really trying to query that one. I think there's a market for that one. Um, not saying that I don't think there's a market for other stuff, but I think that's a more commercial concept. And so I'm
Sure.
really trying to, I've queried, probably 50 or 60 plus now with no response yet. So, still, I think I got to do some, I think I got to rethink that one a little bit.
I know that one of the things that we're both involved in is this community, right? It's just I don't know if I've ever been a part of a more welcoming, helpful. I'm going to cheerlead and just hope for the best for everybody. There's always a bad egg here or there, but honestly, man, it's just a wonderful community, and I think that reaching out and I think a lot of people would be willing to relate with that situation, and if they've got experience with it, absolutely maybe give advice, and that's kind of where I go with things, and it's really refreshing. Do you find yourself feeling the same way about this community?
Yeah, no, I think it's very supportive and it's very open and everything. I haven't dove in as much just because even like online, I'm like introverted, right? Like so I've always been an introverted person. Writing is a great hobby for introverts, right? Until you
Sure.
realize you have to go market stuff. you know, um, and COVID's actually made me worse. I'm like, hey, I work from home. I'm home all the time. Like I'm good with that.
Sure.
But so I'm trying to dive in a little bit more. I still have that. There's that fear in the back of their head of people stealing ideas, right?
Oh yeah.
So I'm trying not to be so afraid of that because, I've learned even if two people have the same idea, they're going to write things very differently.
Yeah.
I had a
I get
very
it though.
strange experience with that. Actually, is I read Red Rising after I'd written my novel, and I think even after I published it. And then I realized like the first like 60 pages, they play out very similarly in a
Wow.
very strange kind of way. I'm like, oh yeah, well they have similar father things going on here. They have similar that, but then it goes extremely different directions, right? Like Red Rising went away I did not expect at all, right? So
I'm very excited to dive into that. Now that I know I'm really digging the science fiction aspect of fiction, that is one. First, it was Sun Eater series, which I've dipped my toe in, and I'm just loving it. The next is just naturally Red Rising, so I'm very excited for that one as well.
it's great. It really is. I still do this thing where I'm like surveying literature, and so I read a lot of firsts of series and then don't go farther, just because I'm trying to see what's the market like, what's going on out there, why is everyone raving about this book, and then I get a feel for the author and their style, right? And so I'm really bad about finishing series because I go into it from that perspective, and so I can't say I've read anything past Red Rising except for just that first book, but
Sure.
the first book was great and
I'll tell
surprising.
you, speaking about the community and somebody who knows their way around traditional publishing and indie publishing, he goes by the Renegade Bard on YouTube, but he's Brian D. Anderson. He writes in the Conan franchise. He's got books out traditionally published himself. Man, I talked to him on the channel, and he is a wealth of knowledge. Man, absolutely. If you have questions about that, anything really, if I have a question about anything, I would go to him. You can tell just from his comments, and I always appreciate you being here, Brian. I have to have you back on, man. We just bullshitted the whole time. It was so fun. And he had just the best knowledge, and he's a funny guy. But yeah, he's always got wonderful experience to share.
Yeah, no, I was looking on my shelf because I was pretty sure I have something, but I can't find it that has his name on it. So,
oh, okay, yeah, Brian D. Anderson. Gosh, he's got quite a few out. And I don't know every one of them. I know that he's talked to. I've heard some really funny stories about Michael J. Sullivan and him that are buddies. That man, he can keep the laughter going. So always appreciate you being here, Brian. Man, you drop a wealth of knowledge every single time, and I appreciate it.
So
going.
So yeah, just on goals, short stories, trying to get that novel going again. It's very sciencey, space opera. Lots of light speed travel, faster than light travel going on in that one. And that one, I'm really trying to incorporate my living in space knowledge to that. That's an important part of that book. And so trying to, because that is something that I'm fortunate enough to have and that a lot of people don't, trying to incorporate that knowledge into the book. So that's trying to go into that middle grade sci-fi. Those are the 4 things for next year, I think.
Have you read The Martian?
I've read The Martian, and I loved it, and it befuddles me to this day that it became a New York Times bestseller.
Really?
Because it's so sciencey, right?
Okay.
It is a fictional version of the scientific method.
I heard it's really the closest thing to actually doing that thing, like very accurate.
Yeah, and
I haven't read it.
It's just crazy to me because it just doesn't come across as something that everyone would love.
Sure,
that's the thing. Like, yeah, sure, we're reading science fiction, we love science fiction, cool, but all these people who don't read science fiction love the book, and I'm like, this is an engineering problem-solving book.
You think it had anything to do with the adaptation and having what's his name?
Matt Damon.
Yeah.
I think that helps, but people were reading it before that.
Yeah.
And Andy Weir is actually not an engineer. I heard he came to Johnson once, and I got to hear him speak. And he's he lived on forums pretty much, and whenever he had a question, he'd ask a question. He'd go to these science forums and he'd say, "What would happen if this happened?" And people would answer him.
If you can pick through and decipher through the nonsense in a forum, then you can really learn a lot of stuff. There's people there for real passion and wanting to get truth and constructive criticism. But you have to be kind of got the BS glasses on and off, right?
Yeah.
And that's so cool to hear too, because for some reason I thought that he was like a PhD, or he had to be, just in my mind, knowing
he might be, but he does not work in the space industry. Like, I know that for sure.
So what are some socials that you are active people are going to want to see what you're up to, and also where to find your books.
So Twitter, at Justin D in space is somewhere I'm more random thoughts there. Sometimes it's about books, and sometimes it's about basketball, and so it's sometimes it's about the Astros. It could be all kinds of things. So that one's more random and open. Could be about a cool space thing. It could be about something I'm working on for space. I didn't get to talk about this, but this is the other company I work for here is Stellar Access. There we go.
I was wondering, I seen that in your bio. What is
yeah,
that?
and they're more commercial space, and so literally, if someone in the chat wanted to fly something to space, I might be able to help you with that. But you got to have significant amount of dollars. But I could help you with that. That's and now we're trying to that
What
company's
sort of
whole
thing
goal is trying to
one
open up the market.
What is something that one would want to have flighted to space?
Well, so we're thinking more in just terms of marketing, right? Like I was like, if I flew one of my books, right, just for the hell of it, just like let me fly one of my books to space. It never comes back; it burns up. But still, it'd be pretty cool to be like, hey, guess what? This book's in space, and this is where it is right now. It's flying over Russia right now. So just from that perspective, we could do that kind of thing.
I have a book, and I hope I don't say it the wrong way. It's by Daniel Maidman. There's an actual company that does that. It's like they store books on the moon, like in a database or something. It's like a file, I believe.
Oh, I think there is the whole I can't remember what it's called right now, but the whole like store humanity elsewhere in case we all get blown away type thing, right?
Yeah.
Like an asteroid comes and hit us, which I've done research on that, by the way, so that's pretty cool stuff. But yeah, I think that exists somewhere.
Yeah, because I was just flipping through like the dust cover. It is really beautiful, and it said something about this book is on the moon in file format. I was like, okay, never heard of that before, but something very cool. Where can people purchase your books?
Most of them are most places. So if you want paperback, I've gone different publishing routes each time, which is a little bit strange. The first one actually was published by an indie author indie press out of Austin called Atmosphere Press. Sorry. So that one's a little bit wider. You'll find if you went out searching, you'd be able to find the paperback, especially a lot of other places. But Amazon, a bookshop, that one a lot. Like I said, a lot of places. Barnes and Noble, lots of places. For Assassination, Amazon's really the only place to get the paperback. I think you can get it in Barnes and Noble too. But the digital's everywhere. And then Betrayal, same way. Digital's everywhere. I think the paperback's only on Amazon.
So I believe February is the month I will be reading Embargo, and
Awesome.
I am very excited. I'm hoping that there's going to be some. I'm sure there will be. People always want to do buddy reads, and it's a good way to get more people reading the book.
No, that would be great.
I'll definitely be chatting with you about that, and of course trying to find people that want to do such a thing, because this year I'm getting more read.
And I was wondering, how can the author participate in a buddy read? It's something I've actually been thinking about the last few days. It's like, hey, when you finish the first chapter, let me tell you, there's something very significant that happens in the first chapter, and I have a very personal story that relates to that. So,
wow,
I was wondering if there's some way, or hey, you got to the end of this chapter, and I wrote this note about this thing, but I've got literally three more pages of notes that ended up being one sentence. I was wondering, if there's some way how the author can be more interactive in a buddy read.
You're part of my Discord, right? You're part of my Discord.
Yeah.
I believe.
Yes.
And so that's going to be where we do it. And man, I think not only is that really cool and fascinating that you thought of that, but to be willing to share that and add to the experience, I think is just saying even more. So I'd very much be into that.
Yeah.
So we'll talk about that.
Yeah, I think there's ways that authors can interact and drop those things that we never. It's in our heads, it's bouncing around, but we never got it on the page. It'd be like, it'd be cool if we could tell the readers. It's almost like when you get the director's cut of the movie or the behind the scenes, right? Like sometimes you see that in a book where it's like, here's a deleted chapter. Well, it's like, here's a deleted paragraph, right? Like, or here's something that I had literally in this book for 10 years that didn't make the final cut, like that kind of thing.
It's very insightful, and again, Ryan, he's a wonderful sci-fi author. I'm reading his now, Lost Souls, which is great. And he's just a helpful guy. He's very community driven. And so we're already racking up some people to do it. I'm excited for it, and 100%. And he says he's super down. That's a great idea. I think so too. So that will absolutely, we'll talk about that in the Discord, and get some people together for that. It's been a little bit of a different one. I'm sorry about the yelling and stuff at first,
No,
but
I'm just glad it wasn't my kids. There was no dogs barking. I thought for sure. I don't know who'd be walking on my door at 8:30 at night, but I was sure someone was going to knock on the door. Dogs were going to go nuts. That kind of thing.
Honestly, I think that there's a little cry in every single live I do, but not near as what was happening. She's had a little bit of a bellyache, my newborn. She's not newborn. She's almost 3 months now. Still pretty new,
Yeah.
but yeah, every now and then that happens, but we'll get through it. The interview must continue, guys.
Yeah. No,
we got to get through this knowledge and talk about books. But yeah, so I appreciate you guys being patient with it. But I wanted to thank you. You've dealt with me rescheduling. You've been patient. You're a really nice guy.
Thank you.
Doing something really cool in many different areas. Your career, your writing, it's all very interesting. And I just look forward to keeping in touch with you and talking books, man. Just keep that love of literature and just expanding on it.
Well, I don't know how you do this, man. You got 4 kids, one's nearly a newborn, and you do it every night. So thank you very much. Like I said, I don't know how you pull it off, but that's awesome.
Wonderful support system. My wife, she knows it's only, if it goes over an hour, it usually doesn't go over much over like an hour and a half at the most. And she's cool with that. So she's wonderful.
No, that's awesome. It's an underrated aspect of being a writer in the literary community for sure.
Yes. Shout out to the wonderful wives and partners and all that.
Yeah.
Support system. They're great. You need it.
Yeah.
But again, Justin, thank you so much for being here and let me borrow you for a little bit.
Yeah,
you guys that came live, of course, man, I love you guys as well. You're always here. Makes this an exciting thing for me every single day when I do it. And I don't ever plan on stopping. I love doing it. So if you guys keep showing up, I'll keep doing it. And for those who watch in the future, I also appreciate you just as much. Like, share, subscribe, all that fun stuff, because that will help us grow. And I'm trying to think. Give me 1 second. Got to shout out my next interview, and I do this every time. I remind myself before every interview who I'm talking with, but I have so many that I just forget. So bear with me, folks. T.A. Bruno, yes, T.A. Bruno. He's another sci-fi author. It's the sci-fi month.
Yeah, no, that's great. I listened to Down Below Beyond about 2 months ago, I think, and it's great.
Very creative, man. So yeah, I get to talk with him tomorrow. That'll be fun. You guys tune in. We'll talk to you then. And until next time, guys, have a wonderful night.
Yeah. Thanks, everyone. Really appreciate it.